One of the big things I want you to know, just as we're sitting here today and we're looking at the story out of California, is that the story in California related to wildfires is not over. We're going to see really strong winds again, not as strong as last week, but still very strong. And even if it's not as strong as last week, they could still be hurricane force winds. Hurricane force winds start at 74 miles per hour or higher. And last week we were seeing winds up to 100 miles per hour, which is a category 2 hurricane. And one of the difficult things to wrap our minds around, at least it was difficult for me to sort of imagine. You could see it. You can see it on the video, how fast the fire is moving. But why was it so difficult to just try to get ahead of it? What made this so hard? That's one of the big questions sitting in front of politicians and obviously law enforcement officials and officials from the fire department. Why? Why was this so terrible? Just a quick note on that. There's a lot of politics that are getting involved in this conversation. I'm not going to get into any of them today. We're not going to talk about global warming. We're not going to talk about internal policies from different departments. We're not going to talk about Democrats or Republicans. We're not going to really talk about any of that. Because until we actually know the devastation from this fire, those conversations could change a lot. Right now, we have some reports of several deaths, and I don't mean that as disrespectful of not saying a number. I'm saying the number is changing almost every day. And if this fire killed, let's say, 30 people, or if it killed 150 people, that's going to change the story, and it's going to change some of the reaction. It's going to change some of the questions. We have no idea just how devastating this fire is, but we know enough to know it's historic and one of the worst in California history already. One of the things I did read last week that I think is important, again, pulling on this thread for you, is that the speed of the fire created a huge challenge. And one fire scientist broke it down this way. He said, basically, with the wind speeds what they were, you would have needed to respond to the fire within about 10 minutes. You would have to get to that fire within that time period, give or take. But by 15 minutes, you've already lost control. Speaking of that, I was curious to learn a little bit more about what's being dropped on the fires. I know you're seeing a lot of videos about that. The fire retardant that's being dropped is sometimes red, it's sometimes pink. And I thought, well, what is that? Is it the same thing that's coming out of a fire extinguisher? It's not. Just so you know, that is different. The dye is for targeting, so we know exactly where it fell. Most of what you're seeing there is actually water, but a small amount of it is essentially fertilizer. There's a chemical reaction that's taking place that is making some of the vegetation less flammable. So it actually stops the fire from being able to burn. So there's the part of it that's trying to put it out and also stop it from spreading, which is why sometimes you see the drops happen on the perimeter and not right through the fire. So as you're seeing more video of that, I know you're seeing a ton of it on social media. That's part of the strategy. Yes, sometimes it's going over the top of it, but a lot of the times it's going around the sides of it too. There is some debate about those ingredients that are being used on fires and whether or not they're environmentally safe. That is a debate that has been ongoing for years. The fire service stands by the safety of it and the effectiveness to use during an emergency and the attempts not to use it during certain, close to certain water sources. But when push comes to shove, you want to put the fire out. I wanted to share with you just one kind of side story and one something to consider. One of the side stories that you're hearing about has to do with prisoners working on the fire lines. That's been a side story that some have paid attention to say, wait a minute, who's actually fighting these fires? And some of them are California inmates. There's about 900 that are helping LA firefighters right now. And this is a voluntary program that's been in place for many years that is about trying to give opportunities for those that are in prison, but not for high level offenses. So if you're convicted of something like arson, for example, or like rape or murder, something like this, you're not part of this crew. You have to have 8 years or less remaining on your sentence. You cannot be convicted of a high level offense. And this is when you're able to take this job. And it's about training inmates to have an actual skill as well when they leave prison. They're able to have opportunities as part of this program for jobs when they get out. And there is an element that could lead to some of their criminal records being expunged, depending on their work. The pay for this, for the conservation camp incarcerated fire crew members, they earn between $5.80 and $10.24 per day. They earn an additional $1 per hour paid by CAL FIRE if there's an active emergency, which there is. And during emergencies, crews can work a 24-hour shift followed by 24 hours of rest. one 24-hour shift during an active emergency, the lowest skill level would earn $26, just under $27 per day. They are also paid for their rest periods. So I wanted to share that because you might hear things online about who these people are that are working, whether or not the conditions are fair, and what they're getting paid. The final thing I wanted to share with you, it's an editorial that was published first in Newsweek. It's now been shared quite a bit. And this editorial gives a very contrarian point of view about the fire and what the cause is, because that's ultimately the question. Like, why did this happen? Why is this so bad? And who's to blame? And what this article does is it sort of takes it out of all of that. And it takes a look at the geographical area of California. There's a common misconception that beneath the asphalt, Los Angeles is a desert. It isn't. It's a grassland. And part of the natural cycle of the grassland ecosystem is fire. 27 years ago, Mike Davis wrote Ecology of Fear, Los Angeles and the Imagination of Disaster. One of the chapters is titled The Case for Letting Malibu Burn. In it, he argued that the area between the beach and the Santa Monica Mountains simply never should have been developed. No matter what measures we take to prevent it, those hills are going to burn, and the houses we erect upon them are only so much kindling. The article goes on, I'm going to put this in the show notes for you to read. It doesn't just say, well, too bad. We built in a really tough area. This is just going to take place. It also talks a little bit about the way that we did some urban planning. One of the things the author says, in New York City, there was this desire to have nature. So they built Central Park. If there was no separation between urban development and nature, it was actually constructed. But in these areas of California that we're seeing that are so devastated, there's no real separation between nature and urban development. And because of that, they're intertwined. And because of that entanglement is part of the reason why we're seeing the exacerbation of these fires. Mother Nature is a force, and Mother Nature usually wins. And I wonder how we can think about that in a way that's deferential while also trying to advance our own desires and hopes.